Good morning. I'm Aaron Heiser with Maker's Leather Supply, and in today's video we are going to make, we're going to use our knife pouch template here. This template's been out a while, but I never did a video on it. However, as other businesses start to sell our template, they've said that, you know, that's kind of a problem. So we're just going to go ahead and knock one out today. These have been really popular. This is one of our newest templates, but yet it's one of our best selling. It's real simple. It slides onto a belt, it holds a pocket knife, and there you go. Now your pocket knife doesn't have to take up room in your pocket. I know I can't stand my pockets being full of stuff. So yeah. Before we start, I'm not huge on doing commercials by any means, but this fellow sent us this coffee. Pecan Hill from Thomasville, Georgia. He sent us a bunch of samples of this coffee. He apparently he's a superhero leather worker, which means he works all day and then goes home and does leather work at night. Anyway, he watched our videos, he noticed I like coffee, and he sent me a bunch of samples, and every one I've tried so far has been amazing. So, I mean, if you like coffee, why not hook him up? All right, what comes in the template set is this piece right here. It says cut one, flip it over, cut another one, and you can cut this one out of anything from 4 ounce all the way up to 7 ounce leather. Today we're going to be using, this is a scrap of, it's probably 5/6, even though that's not a normal weight that I carry, so I'm not really sure where the scrap came from. I just kind of grabbed it, it looked right, and we did it. Also in there is 2 different stitch line patterns. If you're using one for a tiny little knife, there's one right there. If you're making one for a medium to larger size knife, this is your stitch line pattern here, and I'll show you how we're going to use it. This is my pocket knife that I carry every day, and that's what we're going to make it for, is this little case knife right here. I'm not sure what the model number is of this case. I know that, you know, like the trappers and things like that, there are some very standardized sizes of some of these little pocket knives. This is just one that I like it because it has this, and I can open it one-handed when I'm trying to cut boxes open or whatever here at the shop. Anyway, so this is the knife we'll be using. So we will be using the larger stitch line pattern, okay, about like that. It may be a tiny bit loose in there, but after it's wrapped around a belt and everything, it'll tighten up just fine. But it's definitely too large for the smaller stitch line unless I really want to wet form it and all that, and I'm not doing all that. It's just not a project that really needs that. So without further ado, we will get started. I'm going to angle this camera down a little bit because what you need to see is my bench and not my face. So lucky you. So here we are. I hopefully have everything I need to start this video here, but I'm just going to take my my template here, and I'm going to put it on my, let me get my pipe out of the way. I'm going to put it on my my leather and just find me a nice clean spot to do it in. I'm going to basket weave this, so it doesn't have to be perfectly clean. You know, you don't have to have perfect leather to do a project if you know how to work around it. I've got my scalpel here, and I'm just going to go ahead and cut around my template using my scalpel. One of the more difficult parts of this template and this build is just doing the little belt slots, but we're going to talk about those in a minute. There's a couple of different ways to do it. One is, if you have a fancy punch, then hey, punch that sucker out. If you don't, we will hand cut one out just to show you how it's done so that you don't stress about it. Those punches are expensive. The pattern here calls for a 1 3/4 inch punch to fit that slot, and I believe that's about a $68 bag punch. So again, I'll teach you how you don't need to have it, even though it is, of course, great to have. Doing curves is always fun with these templates here. Just cutting around it, making sure that the template itself does not move. And since this is a little bit thicker than what I usually use with a scalpel, I am having to go through it twice here to cut it all out. And you can always rough cut it out of the big piece here, and then once all this other leather's off my bench, I can sit down and, you know, fine tune it to fit the template perfectly. I am going to show you a way that I do these, though, that I'm just going to go ahead and cut this out by hand here. I am going to show you a way, though, that when I do the backside, I won't individually cut it out like I just did this one. I will, I'll actually just cut out a big square that fits on the back of this, and then I will cut it out according to this and not set the template down, and then they're going to match up a lot nicer. All right. I'll probably even sew it together before I do that. So let's set this down for a second. One of the other things I like to do is I like to go ahead and punch the holes in the front piece before I get the back piece on it. I don't know why, but I seem to have better results when I do it that way. It's not I don't know that it's a normal procedure by any means. I don't know that it is, you know, something that's taught by anybody or something you're supposed to do that way. But again, it's what works for me, and I always teach that if it works for you, then it's not wrong. So, grab the stylus here. What I'm going to do, I am not going to even think about punching that hole through this template. We all know that if you use a punch too big, it will crack a template, and that is a problem. So I'm just going to trace it out here, and then I'll take the template off and I'll punch my hole. So I'm just using the stylus, and I'm just tracing out the slots. These are 1 3/4 inch slots. Okay. Your standard belt is usually 1.5 inches, and if you only make these 1.5 inches, then you're going to have fitment issues, because, you know, if they're using a thicker belt, not necessarily a wider belt, but even one that's thicker, one that was probably made by a leather worker, they're going to have a hard time getting it through an 1.5 inch slot. You know, even though technically they are the same size, it's just easier to have a little bit larger hole for them to use on that. All right. I do not have, I can't find my daggum regular cutting board, so I'm just going to put another piece of leather under this to try to cushion my blows, because I don't like punching against this self-healing mat. It's not really that great for my punches, and it's definitely not that great for the mat. This is a number 8, which is a 7/32 hole punch, and I'm going to show you how to hand punch one of these first. I'm just putting it right there at the very bottom of the slot. Alright, and I only went through my one piece of leather there. And then I'm going to put it at the very top of the slot. There we go. Again, I'm just trying to go easy on it because I don't want to accidentally punch into this board here. Alright, now if I was going to punch both of the holes this way, I would go ahead and do the other side as well, or both the slots, but since I'm not, sorry my leather fell down, but since I'm not, I'm just going to cut these one at a time. So, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my handy dandy ruler, and I'm going to put it right up here on the edge of that slot, or those two holes that I punched. Okay, and I am going to cut out the space in between. Now, I'm cutting from one hole to another. Right before I get to the back hole here, I'm going to turn around and go back the other way. I do that for a very, very simple and useful reason. If I don't, when this knife hits that blank space and it gets into that hole, I will automatically, no matter how hard I try not to, I will slip across and cut the top part of that hole. And then on your finished project, you'll always have that little bitty slice there. And I don't like that. So now I'm going to turn around, and so I went ahead and went back the other way, you know, and so that side is cut. Now I'm going to take my ruler, move it over to the other side of the dots, or the holes. I'm going to cut it out again. There we go. And that is how you hand cut a belt slot. Okay? Again, there's nothing wrong with doing it that way. Lots of people do it that way. One of the things I will stress though, and I didn't really do it right here, get that up there close, on the inside here, on this side, you can tell that I didn't really get right up to that cut line, and you can tell that I used 2 hole punches and a cut. So I'm going to widen that just a tiny bit. I'm going to recut that line so that it's a little bit wider and you can't tell that I did that. That is the big problem with doing it this way. A lot of folks aren't super careful to get right on that line, and it just looks, I guess you can say, kind of amateur that it's not done that way. I apologize. I got to turn this air conditioner off because I know it plays heck with the sound of the video here. Matter of fact, I'm going to pause this video while that air conditioner cycles through, and then I'll come back. Alright, we are back. Sorry about that. Again, normally I turn off the air conditioner before we start if I'm sitting here for a video. So again, I'm going to run this thing up here, and I'm going to put the ruler right on that line. I'm just going to shave off a tiny bit of that side there, and hopefully square it up to where it doesn't look like I cut it like this. And just like all the videos that I've done, my hope is to not only teach you to do a new project, but to help you get along and have finer work so that it can be the best that it can. Alright, much nicer. You don't see the 2 holes, you just see 1 slot. So, alright, now I'm going to show you the other way to do it. If you do have the fancy punch, which I happen to have because, you know, we're a store here too. There it is, 1 3/4 inch bag punch. I'm going to set her right there. And I'm going to hit it. Again, I'm going real gentle on it because I don't want to go through everything and hit this bench on, or this punch onto my bench. So there you go. A little bit quicker, isn't it? And of course, you don't have to worry about you know, if it looks right or not, because it's going to look the same every single time. But like I said, that's like a $68 punch. So I fully understand if you either A, don't want one, B, don't need one, or C, just plain old, you know, 68 bucks could go a long way somewhere else. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mark my stitch lines on this, and then I'm going to use that stitch line also as kind of my border for tooling, okay? So we had already decided that we were going to use the large stitch line marker. I'm going to set her up here. Match it up. As you can tell, it matches up with, you know, the leather pattern here, and it fits perfectly in between my belt slots. So that is by design. That is supposed to happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw, mark a little line with my stylus right down both sides of the stitch line marker here. And again, these are going to be part of my border for any tooling I'm about to do, which I have a new basket weave stamp here that I've been wanting to play with, so this seems like a good project. I like basket weaving small projects because I'm not as likely to screw them up. So I need my wing dividers. I need, my bottle of water is empty. Tell you what, I work in a shop with some very selfish people. I think I'm the only one that knows how to fill the water bottle. I will pause and be right back. All right, the bottle is full. So, I'm gonna spray my leather, get it a little bit wet. What I'm going to do is I want to keep my my tooling about 1/8 of an inch inside the maybe even a little bit more, maybe 3/16 of an inch inside the stitch lines there. Okay, so I'm going to use my wing dividers and draw my top and bottom borders here. know what? I'm changing my game plan here. This is actually going to make a really nice stitch line. And I will go ahead and widen it up a little bit more for my border line. And when I say stitch line, I'm just talking about the top and the bottom. These two are still going to be your right and your left. So I widened it up to about 1/4 of an inch here. Now I'm cutting in my border. So now my border line is about 3/16 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch maybe, I don't know. Anyway, inside my stitch line, and that's how it needs to be. Sorry, I hadn't made one of these in a few days. I've actually been at a school for a week learning another craft, and yeah. Alright, so here I am. I'm using my centering ruler. Has this grid on it where I can, it's hard for you to see from there, but basically I can line up these lines with the stitch line there that I drew on with my template, and I can mark me a straight border line for my tooling. So there's what we've ended up with. Let that focus a little bit. There we go. Come on, focus. There, that helps. My new light's pretty bright. So anyway, on the side you have get my pointer out here. So on the side we have that's our stitch line, and that's our border line for tooling. Then on the top and the bottom there's a stitch, and there's the border, bottom, stitch, and border. There it is. Okay, so I'm going to take my swivel knife and I'm going to cut out, well, first I'm going to put some tape on the back of this. Probably should have located a tape gun. One more thing that's supposed to be on this bench that I've been gone for a week. Give me a second. Alright, so I went ahead and just threw some packing tape, some shipping tape on the back of this. Alright, now I'm going to, real quick, take my scalpel and cut off the excess tape, because what I really hate is when that stuff folds over onto my leather, and then it will create a spot on my leather that dye would not penetrate and antique would not penetrate, and it would just forever be a spot on the leather. I'm probably not dyeing or antiquing this project, but still, I want oil to penetrate it. I want it to be nice. Alright, so got my tape on there so it won't stretch. By the way, let me explain that. This leather, especially with basket weaving and geometric stamping, it will cause stretch, and the leather will form a bowl type shape. And anyway, we can alleviate all of that with some tape. So here I have my handy dandy swivel knife, and I'm just going to cut out my border line right quick. There we go. I have cut out my border. You know, you can skip ahead in the video if you don't need any tips or tricks on some basket weave here, but that's what I'm about to do, some basket weave. So there's two different ways to do basket weave. The way Barry King teaches is an amazing way, but this is a tiny little project and I can't do it on this. So all I'm going to do is I'm drawing me a little line here. I have my really cool new Texas shaped basket weave from Barry King, and it's got a little star in it, in the middle of it, and the star is pretty much right here in the center of Texas where we are, so I think it's my new most favorite stamp in the world. I'll put it right there on that line, give it a whack. Let's give it more whack. There we go, get her deep. Okay, I'm going to move to the other side of the line. Now this is not a symmetrical basket weave. It has a top and a bottom because the shape of Texas does not need to be upside down, ever. And so I have to be careful as I'm turning my project that I also turn my basket weave tool and keep that sucker straight, because I don't want Texas upside down. I will throw this project out the window before I let Texas be upside down. Alright, so there's my first line of basket weaving right there. See if I can get that awesome new stamp in there. So hard for me to... There it is. It is a cool stamp. Alright, when I got over here to the edge, I just kind of tilted the basket weave up a little bit and didn't let it go across that line there. Alright, real simple way to do that. Now I'm going to go ahead and go down and start my next line of them. Once again, making sure that my Texas shape is upright. I like themed basket stamps. They're a lot of fun. I have a couple of really cool ones. I've got one that's got what I call the mud flap girl. You used to see her on the back of mud flaps of trucks, but it's just a silhouette of a female sitting down. I know you've seen it. But anyway, it's one of my favorite basket weave tools, but unfortunately it also is for a very limited customer base. I mean, somebody wanting some real traditional stuff's probably not going to want that one on there. So I'm just going down and doing more and more rows here, trying to keep it as straight as possible. And when I get to a border, I'm leaning it up a little bit so that it doesn't cross that border. And then when I'm down to the bottom, I'll go back and do those last couple of rows on the top, and we will have a sweet basket stamped knife sheath. One of the other rules with basket weaving, and I see a lot of people not doing it, and again, it's not a rule, it's a personal preference, but my personal preference is if you're basket weaving something, you should border it as well. Like, granted, I did my little cut border, but I mean putting a border stamp around it. It just makes it more finished looking to me. I see a lot of folks that they'll basket weave something and they'll put it on social media, and they'll ask for help on how they can improve, and honestly, their basket weaving doesn't look bad. It's just the idea that it does not have a definitive border around it is what makes it look bad to me. And they, and a lot of, sometimes people will let them know that, but sometimes people either don't see that or maybe they don't, they don't feel that way about it. Again, there's not a wrong or a right way, but just a personal preference. And my preference is do a border. So, grab me a border stamp of an appropriate size here. Alright. Got me a little border stamp. It looks almost like a camouflage tool, except it's got some little seeds in it too. Come on, focus. It'll focus on it if I do that, I bet. Maybe not. Anyway. Alright. And I'm just going to run this border stamp around my project. Oh, I'll show you how this looks before my border stamp. Okay, and then in a minute I'll show you how it looks after my border stamp. And hopefully you will agree with me, but if you don't, that's okay. There's plenty of people that don't agree with me on all kinds of stuff. Ask Janie Sue. anybody's ever seen somebody like Barry King or Ryan King or Devin Don Gonzalez basket weave, man, they're a lot faster at this than I am. I mean, they can just sling that sucker down the line faster than I can run a beveler. And it's even straighter than mine. But it probably attributes to the miles and miles and miles of basket weaving and geometric stamping that they've done in their lifetime versus mine. I've got plenty of leatherworking experience, but I don't do a lot of basket weaving and geometric stamping, so therefore. Okay, now this is going to line up pretty well to where this stamp is going to just, you know, have the perfect number of them going down there. But let's say, you know, I was kind of worried about them lining up there. You don't want like a half a stamp down there at the bottom, you know, or a big gap. What you can do is you can take and just kind of lightly impress it into the leather and keep going down your line and decide, you know, maybe one needs to be spaced out a little bit more or crunched up a little bit closer together to get that perfect fit. So if the funny thing is, if there's a gap out here in the middle of your project versus down here in the corner, it won't be as noticeable. I don't know why, but that's how it is. So I'll go ahead and do my corner one, and then I'll come back and I'll just put one right in between them. There we go. I think it looks a lot better with the border stamp. Hopefully you do too. All right. Now, I am going to peel this off the back. The other thing I want to do is put my maker's mark on the back piece of leather before I stick it to the front piece of leather. So I will take, and I'm going to take my template, I'm going to set it on here, but I'm just going to rough cut around it. I'm not trying to, and remember, we have to flip it over because this is the back side. Otherwise, it's just going to be another front. We don't want that. So anyway, I just want to make sure that I get a general piece that's kind of shaped like I need it, but yet not exacting by any means. There we go. That piece is now in the floor. All right. I do want to get it kind of close because I want my maker's mark to be right in the middle of it. I don't want it to be accidentally get a stitch through it or something like that. I'd really like for it to be nicely placed in the middle. My maker's mark is pretty big, and so I don't have a ton of room that I can make sure that it's in the right spot there, okay? So yeah, and I can't do this. I don't want to put my maker's mark on it last because it would, I have to use such force with this big old stamp that, I mean, you'll be able to see the impression on the front of the project if I do it all at once. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to center this as best I can, and I'm going to trace it off lightly, and this piece is dry so the tracing won't be too terrible. Okay, and then I'll even take my stitch line template here and kind of line it up too. Once again, upside down is how it's going to fit, and I'm just going to very lightly scribe me a couple of lines here, and I'm going to have a real good chance of getting my big old maker's mark without any stitches in it once we're done. Got it good and wet. I need to find a heavier maul. Here's my 2-pounder, because again, this thing's got a lot of square area to it. It's a great stamp made by Steel Stamps. Absolutely my most favoriteest thing in this workshop anymore. I love this stamp. So here we go. Ain't it cool? So now I'm going to set that aside for a minute. I come back over to this. Now you don't have to do what I'm about to do, but I'm going to do it. I am going to run a stitch just right there in that middle section there. Okay? That way, when you look at the front of this, the entire thing has stitching around it versus it not having stitching right there. Just one of those little things that kind of gives it a real complete and more finished look. All right. So I am going to grab my stitch wheel and I'm just going to follow my line with it. There it is. All right, I've got me some little stitch markings there. There it goes. And I'll use my awl and go through that. That is one piece I totally forgot to grab, is my little rubber pad that I use under my awl. Be right back. All right, got my little board. I've got my Berry King awl handle, and this is a number 1 blade. I'm going to be using the 0.8 millimeter thread. This is our brand of thread. Really good stuff. And I'm going to go ahead and make my stitching holes here. Then I'll grab my little stitching clamp, and we'll do just these couple of stitches, and then after that we will put the 2 pieces together and I'll show you the final assembly. I need to put one extra little stitch hole up here as kind of a tie-off, I guess you could say. And you'll see what I mean. When we come back, we'll stitch all the way up to that hole, cut the thread, and then when we go to stitch the entire thing in one big continuous stitch line, it'll hold that thread in there. So I've punched my holes, grab my little stitching clamp here, bring the camera back up a little bit. I'm not going to hand sew this entire thing on video because you will get sick of my voice and my face and whatever else. But I will do a little bit here. So, got my thread, got my little harness needles. I prefer the harness needles. They have a rounded point to them. So when you stick them in, they're more likely to find the hole that you made and not try to make their own little hole like a sharp needle would. So there you go. That's why I like the harness needles. Alright, so I'm going to start back here at the low spot. See, the low spot. Start at that one, and it's also right in the corner of where that other stitch line is going to meet up. Okay? And I always put my thread through my finished side first, pull it tight in the back, and then go through the back side to come back. The secret to good hand stitching is you do every single stitch the exact same way, and then they will all look the same way. If you change how you do things, you change how you hold your needles, you change how you cross them over in the back, then your stitch will change. And then it won't look as uniform and nice as if you'd had that consistency there. Okay. I could use the 1 millimeter thread. Again, this is the 0.8 millimeter size, the smaller of the two. But this is a small project. It's not a very big project, and so therefore I just don't think it would fit as nicely as this one does. The overstitch wheel I used is probably 6 stitches per inch, which is a little bit large. Normally on small accessories and things like that, I go with closer to 8 stitches per inch, but I've got another video to make after this one today, and I want to make sure that I can get them both done. And this is 2 less stitches per inch. Alright, I'm almost to the end of this little line here. I'll say it again like I have in all my other videos. I hand stitch projects like this especially on my videos, because I don't want you to think that if you don't have a sewing machine, you can't do the project. Granted, the larger projects I do use a sewing machine on, but that's more because I don't have 3 days to spend making the project, you know. There were plenty of years that I did leather work that I didn't own a sewing machine yet. So, there you go. Alright, so here we go. We're coming up to the last stitch hole. I'm going to go ahead and do it just like I did every other one. And when I'm done, I'm going to tie these 2 strings together up here. Okay, and just a real quick little knot. Pull my needles off. Cut my threads. Alright, now I'm going to glue this piece onto my back piece. And then I will run the rest of my stitches. Now, when I put the back piece together, when I cut it out and did my maker's mark there, I just tried to do everything as much in the center as I could. And so that's exactly what we're going to do as we glue the front piece to it, is we're just going to try to put it right in the center. And yeah, and this would help if I had my glue on me, and I don't, so we have to pause it again. Give me a minute. Alright, somebody commented on one of my videos the other day, said I was the most unorganized person he had ever seen. And yeah, okay, so I forget stuff once in a while. I told him he should get out more. Alright, I'm going to take an ink pen and I'm going to kind of mark where this thing's going to set so that I know where to put glue and where not to put glue, more importantly. You don't want to accidentally glue your knife sheath shut, okay? It can lead to a problem, I promise. Alright, and then what I'm also going to mark is I'm just going to put a little line down here at the bottom of where my stitch line is, and a little line up here at where the top of my stitch line is, as far as my vertical stitch lines, the ones that go up and down right here and here. Okay? Now I know where to put my glue outside those 2 little marks. And then on the back of this, it's pretty easy to know where it needs to be because this is already a final shape. Alright, so we'll get to sticking. I tell everybody, put Vaseline on your glue jar threads, and then you won't glue it shut. And I've been telling everybody that for years, and it's a great trick, and it works really well, but I've never actually done it myself, so I struggle with my glue jar. I don't mean to be hypocritical, I just hadn't done it. I don't have a jar of Vaseline here at the shop. So, I'm gonna just slather some glue on here, making sure and staying outside that stitch line there. And then I'm going to very, very lightly, just 1/8 of an inch or so on the bottom part of it. There we go. That'll have a nice, good seal to it there. All right, as we continue around it here, my jar is getting kind of empty. I need to refill it. My brush is barely reaching the glue. And then the same over here. I'm just going to run that brush straight from one dot to the next where we marked that, where that stitch line will be. And now we will set this piece aside for a second while we do the back of this one. Okay, and remember, you're not gluing the top. You know, that needs to be open for the pocket knife to go into, so don't glue it shut. That's the kind of thing I end up doing when I'm in a hurry, and I don't want you to. One day maybe I'll be a professional leather worker and I won't make mistakes like that. Until then, All right, our glue's on. So now we will wait just a second and stick these two pieces together, and you'll just follow your ink lines that you made to know where to put the top back on the bottom piece. This contact cement sets up pretty well, pretty quickly, so I'm just going to go ahead and stick her together. Doesn't have to be precisely in the right spot, but it needs to be as close as you can get it. I did a pretty good job, I guess, of getting it on there. All right, now we are ready to sew this whole thing together, okay? And our stitch line is going to be one continuous stitch line all the way around this bad boy. So I'm going to explain how I do this. I'm going to start right here, okay? I'm going to sew up it, all the way up this stitch line. I'm going to meet that stitch there. Then I'm going to go around right here. I'll cross over where I first started my stitch. I'll run around the bottom all the way over here to the back end, keep going up, and when I get back up to this stitch line and that first stitch hole there, I'll go straight down and it'll end right here. One continuous stitch line. For hand sewing, not as big of a deal, but for a machine sewing, that is just golden that you can do it all in one continuous line, and that's the way you should plan it to keep your presser foot on the right side of it and all, and go around it. So that was how it was designed, for one continuous stitch line. I do the same thing on my my pancake style holsters and things like that. I start right here, work my way up, all the way around, work my way back down, done. So, just one of those little things that I learned with time, because I used to do stuff like that. I'd do this area, I'd do that area, I'd do that area, and I never really understood why I did that once I figured it out. So I'm going to grab my overstitch wheel here, and I'm going to get to marking it. I'm kind of new to this overstitch wheel. I'm having it designed by one of our tool makers, and I like it, but it needs some fine tuning before it's ready to be produced. At least for my liking. I'm sure other people could use it the way it is and do just fine, but I'm kind of picky, and if I'm going to use it, I want to do it. I did not run a stitch groover on this. Alright, and it's not that I didn't want to run a stitch groover on it. It's more of a, oh crap, I should have used the stitch groover first. But that's okay. I'll pull these stitches nice and tight and they'll be fine. But a stitch groover does have a really nice look to it. Very refined looking. And of course, the main purpose of the stitch groover is to cut that little channel for your stitches to fit down into, so that they're below the surface of the leather, and they're not you don't wear the stitches when you know, like this is going to be on your belt. You're going to sit in chairs in your truck or whatever, and this thing's going to constantly rub on stuff, and if those stitches are below the level of the leather, then they will not rub as easily. So they are a good thing. Stitch grooves are not 100% necessary, but they do help a lot. Alright, up and around, back to that very first stitch on the top there, and then I'm going to go straight back down from there. Turn this thing back around to right-handed mode. That is one thing I love about this, is with the wheel on the side, it's either a righty or a lefty, but it's ambidextrous where you can change it from one to the other. And there we go. All my stitches are marked. So soon as it focuses in on it. There they are. All right, so I'm going to go through here and I'm going to poke all these holes, and then I'll come back. I'll start the hand stitching with you. I'll pause it again, then I'll end the hand stitching with you, and then we'll complete our project. But I'm not going to make you watch me do all this poking. All right, got all my holes punched, or poked, I guess. And again, I'm going to start going up from this point all the way up. Did a pretty good job centering the maker's mark on the back, so I'm very pleased that turned out. And I'm just going to start hand sewing here, and we'll get this thing going. So I'm going to start it out just like this. I want to keep my stitches low and close to the vise so that they can, so that the leather's not floppy and I don't have to support the leather. I mean, that's what the vise is for. So you don't want to have to be using your hand for that. And just like I did that other stitch, I'm just going to saddle stitch it up and again around all the way the back side and then back down to here, and that's it. So when we get back, I'll be finishing off the stitch there and we'll move on to the next step. Alright, so here we are. I've sewn all the way around. I've got just a couple of stitches left here to do, and I was going to show you kind of how I ended it there. I made sure that there was a stitch hole directly at the bottom of that stitch line, you know, as part of that border stitch. And what I'll do is my last stitch of this will run into that, and then it'll come back and do its back stitch. So we got 2 holes away here. Alright, so this is my very last stitch, minus the back stitches, of course. So like I said, it's going to go down into that bottom border stitch there, and I'll have to kind of wiggle it in because I don't want it to pierce those other stitches. I want it to go in just above them. There we go. And I'm going to wiggle it around, make some room there for the threads that are about to have to go through that hole. Because the smaller awl blade that I use does not make a huge hole, and it makes it difficult to add whole nother stitch inside the same hole. So here I am, I'm on my back stitch now. Again, I put it in, I wiggled it around a little bit so that it would open up some room there. And now I am back stitching 2 stitches and we'll be done with the stitching. There we go. Alright, pull my needles off there, put them in a safe place so I don't lose them. Put my horse down. Let's bring the camera down here so everybody can see. Alright, so here's what we're going to do. I've shown this on several videos before, but people ask me a lot about what kind of thread burner I use. And thread burners are good, don't get me wrong. I have used them over the years. I don't really have a preference that I would say, oh, this one's better than that one. I don't have a ton of experience with them. But this is how I cut off my stitches so that we don't accidentally nick our leather. One of the things I had a problem with a thread burner is I would accidentally burn one of the stitches, and then you got to fix it. So I take my knife, my scalpel, and lay it right at the bottom of that thread, and then I just wiggle the thread back and forth against it, and it's just flush and clean, and it doesn't need to be burned off. Okay? I'm going to do the same thing on the back side. You don't move the knife, you just move the thread against the knife. If you move the knife, you risk nicking your leather, nicking your project, and again, now you don't have a professionally finished project because it has a big old nick in it. Alright? Now, this thread that I tied on top up here, I've got to get it out now. So I'm going to undo my knot, and then I will cut it off the exact same way. As soon as I can get my knot untied. Alright. So, I will take it and do the exact same thing with it. And then with that back one there, I can actually just kind of cut it along because it's actually in between the leathers. All right, now, next thing I'm going to do is grab my flat-faced leatherworker's hammer here. Okay, and I'm going to tap down the entire perimeter that's glued, and also right here where the belt slots are. And that's going to help me when I go to sand and finish these edges, that they'll be good and stuck together, and it'll, once I burnished it, it'll look like one piece of leather, and it won't have a seam in it. So I'm just doing this. Again, this one's known as a leatherworker's hammer. It's just got a flat face to it, and it's never been used on a nail, so it doesn't have any nicks or scratches or anything like that, because that would show up on your leather. And then again, I'm also going to tap down where those belt slots are. I know my new camera system, the sound on it's very sensitive. One of the secrets is just turn your volume down a little bit. Someone said that my S's are bad, which is terrible considering I stutter a little. So anyway, we're gonna go ahead and cut out this back piece now. All right, and so I'm just gonna follow along with my scalpel and cut it off just as even as I can with the front piece, and then we're gonna sand it. Well, first we're gonna cut the belt slots through, and then we'll go out there to the sander and I'll sand the edges nice and smooth, and then burnish, and we'll be done. I'm going to throw a coat of oil on this thing, and I'll put some sort of sealant on it probably tomorrow after that oil dries. Alright, going around a corner is kind of difficult, so I just kind of take it in slices. So that way I'm not trying to tweak this blade to the point that it breaks. Scalpel blades are absolutely amazing for what they do, but they do have a tendency to break if you're putting too much sideward pressure on them. Okay. To punch my holes through on my belt slots, I'm going to do the exact same thing I did with the front. I'm just going to use my big punch. I don't need to demonstrate the other one again, but I'll use my big punch, and I'm just going to go through both layers, and that'll widen up that really nicely and everything. But yet it's not as difficult to do since I've already done the front layer, and it also doesn't kind of, you know, when all hole punches have a bevel to them, you know, they're more narrow at the cutting surface than they are at the base, and that's what gives it strength, so it doesn't bend on you. Anyway, if I try to go through 2 layers at once, I find that bevel really stretches out the leather and sometimes can even cause a rip or a tear. I mean, this is only 8 or 9 ounces combined, so it's not that big of a deal on this project, but it's a good habit that I like to use. So anyway, all right, so we've got that nice and cut out. Again, I'm going to go ahead and punch these holes, and then I'll take this thing out there and sand down my edges, and when I come back in, we'll bevel and burnish the edges, and we're going to be done. So I'm going to take this, put it right there in the previous hole that I punched with it, get my bigger maul out here, and again I'm going to go easy on it because I don't want to go through this other piece of leather and into my cutting mat, because this cutting mat is just not made to be a good punching surface. There we go. So we went through, got a nice clean, you can't even tell I did it in 2 spots, hole there. And I don't remember if that was the one that I'd done with the hole punch or not, but either way, it doesn't look like it. And that's the point. we go. Oh, almost. If I had me a piece of scrap of heavy skirting or something, I wouldn't worry as much about going through it. But this is only a 4 to 5 ounce scrap here, so I do worry about going through it and ruining my chisel. Alright, so again, I'm going to go out there to the sander. I'm not going to take the camera with me, and I'm just going to sand around all these edges to get them nice and even. When I come back in, we'll use our edge beveling tools and bevel that edge and then burnish it, and that'll be that. But in the meantime, I can't wait to put a pocket knife in it. So there she sits. Sits nice and low, so it's not gonna, you know, guys like me that have a little bit of love handle action going on, it's not going to be poking too much. As a matter of fact, though, with this knife, I may end up putting it in this way because that thing will still kind of poke a little. So anyway, it's low enough in the profile that I don't think it's going to slide out by any means. It's not going to accidentally come out. But there's enough room to easily get your thumb and forefinger on it and give it a tug and pull it right out. So I would say this is a good fit here. Again, I'm going to go sand this. When I come back, we'll burnish the edges and we'll call it a day. Thanks. Alright, so I got the edges good and sanded. And now we are going to bevel the edges of the outside. But also, we're going to bevel the backs of the belt slots. Okay. If you use 2 punches and a knife cut, you'll need to bevel the front as well. But if you used the bag punch, the front of it's kind of beveled by that punch, so there's not really a need to. Playing with some new Barry King edgers. These grooved edgers are really nice. They're very much like the Ron's Tools edgers that we sell. So I'm thinking about starting to carry these as well. I really do like them so far. But anyway, I'm going to start with the belt slots here. There we go. And then the other thing I'm going to bevel too is I'm going to bevel the inside of the opening where the knife goes. Otherwise it would be hard to get your knife in. So I'm just going to take it and barely bevel inside those openings there. I mean, just barely. Since it's grain side, it's not the easiest thing to bevel. And then I'll go around the entire outside of the project here. I'm not taking a ton off. Again, this is not a very thick project, so you know, leave it some meat. It doesn't need to be at a 45-degree angle or anything. You're just taking that corner off so that it'll aesthetically look a little bit nicer, and then also it'll wear better. Leaving sharp corners on your work, when something rubs up against it or whatever, it's going to bend that edge of that corner down some, and then it just does not look nice at all. So again, the nicer the project, the nicer your reputation will be. And for those of y'all that are, you know, getting in this, doing leather work to make a little bit of money, well, you can demand a little bit more money if you're putting in the extra work to make it that much nicer. It's one of my biggest pet peeves when you see something that was made in a foreign country with a very low budget, and you know, you see something that they just didn't finish it. You know, just the little things that make it a nice project. The other thing that just gets me about things like that is you'll see something advertised as hand tooled, and maybe it's a giant purse or something like that, and it's just got like one huge flower and then barely some scroll work around it, and it's like, yeah, I bet that took all 15 minutes to hand tool that piece, but yet they're charging as if it took them all day. So anyway, alright, so I've got my indelible burnishing solution here. I'm just going to use my finger to apply this stuff. Take the seal off here. Cannot find my open bottle, which is probably my fault. I bet I took it home to work on something one day and did not bring it back. So I'm going to use my finger to apply this stuff because I don't need a dauber. This stuff doesn't hurt you, and it doesn't color you or anything. You know, it doesn't get like dye on you or anything. And I'm just gonna wipe it around the edge with my finger, being careful not to get it on the front or back of the project. I'm just getting it on the edge. And I will go ahead and pretty much wipe it all the way around. And this stuff doesn't work off friction like most burnishing compounds do. It's almost like it just is gluing the fibers down for you. So I put it on, I let it set for a few seconds, and then I wipe off the excess, and then I just take my finger and go around the project a few times, and it really does well on the edges, and it doesn't require a ton of work. You know, tell people with elbow problems and stuff like that can't sit and rub and burnish on stuff very easily, you know, that this is the stuff they want. Anyway, so I'm just going to take my paper towel here and I'll wipe off all of that excess, because it is kind of dripping, I guess you could say, on the edges. And then I'm going to take my finger and I'm going to burnish it. Now, when I use this stuff, I'm only going to go one direction, okay? Unlike normal burnishing where you'll go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and you're trying to create friction, that's not the goal here. I'm just wiping it. So I'm going to go around it, and once I start to feel friction, that means I'm done. So, get this back on camera. I keep drawing it close to me here. And when I'm done with this, since I'm leaving this thing natural, I'm just going to oil it. And I may put a sealant on it tomorrow. I hadn't decided yet. Probably not. But I'm going to oil it well, and then it'll, you know, really age nicely and stuff with the oil on it. So, not that it'll probably ever get used. It's probably going to sit over there on the example shelf. All right, those edges are done. That wasn't too bad at all, huh? So, the other great thing about that burnishing solution is it works on more than just Veg-Tan. It's actually not my preferred method when I'm just using Veg-Tan, but anytime I've got something like a chrome tan or even an oil tan, I'll use it on it instead of, instead of something else, because it does really well with those edges that normal burnishing stuff doesn't work on. All right, so here I've got some conditioning oil and a little piece of sheep's wool here, and I'm just going to wipe some oil on it. Pretty heavy coat. I didn't mean for it to be that heavy, but that's okay. Turn it over, do it again on the back, and I'll let this bad boy set overnight. It'll look great tomorrow. So, there it is. Thank you very much for watching. We have made a pocket knife pouch sheath thingy. I hate to call it a sheath because it doesn't fit my description of a sheath, but pouch is what we put it under. Anyway, again, I'm Aaron Heiser, Maker's Leather Supply. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.